morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone across the globe joining us today. This is Bridget from Acquia. Today's webinar is Accelerating Your ABM Efforts with Drupal with Judd Mercer and Jeff Calderon from Elevated Third and Eric Williamson from Acquia. Just a couple housekeeping items before we get started. If you have any audio issues, please send them in the Q&A tab and I will assist you. If you have any questions for the presenters, please submit them in the Q&A tab as well, and they will answer them at the end of the presentation. Slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And without further ado, I will pass it over to Eric.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Williamson, and I am the VP of Brand and Digital Marketing here at Acquia. Just 2 seconds about me. So before I joined Acquia, I was actually on the agency side, and so I worked about 10 years within the IPG network, Martin Agency and the Mullen Group. So I've worked on kind of everything from B2B to B2C, whether it's Google and Acquia or Geico, or some of the B2B stuff with Indeed.com. But really excited to be here with you and with some of our favorite partners. If you don't know anything about Acquia, essentially, our vision is to deliver the universal platform for the world's greatest digital experience. How we deliver on that vision is we have an open platform for hosting, managing, building, and then automating with marketing tools. Large and mid-market company, their digital experiences. So that would be their websites, applications, portals. And all of that's based on Drupal. So our company, a little bit like Red Hat and Linux, our company was founded by the same person who founded the Drupal open source project. So that's a little bit about Acquia.
Hey everyone, this is Jeff Calderon. I'm the CEO of Elevated Third. Elevated Third is a 40-person agency with offices in Denver, Seattle, and Raleigh, North Carolina. We've evolved over time. We went all in on Drupal in 2007. That's the only technology that we standardize in. We became an Acquia partner in 2013, and we've been focused on B2B and ABM, more specifically, since 2014. So in addition to managing Elevated Third, I also lead the ABM consulting practice here.
This is Judd Mercer. I am the creative director and the third wheel for the webinar at Elevated Third. So I manage our UX and design team, and I'm probably best described as a creative generalist. So I'm involved on the UX design side, marketing side, analytics side, dev planning and some of that stuff. So kind of end to end on more of the execution.
So as I mentioned, our focus is Drupal and B2B. We combine a very strong Drupal expertise with strategic consulting to drive B2B results. And as part of that, we've developed strong partnerships with the best of the Drupal ecosystem with companies like Acquia, as well as some on the strategic side that provide ABM tools and content.
Great. So you guys know a little bit about us now and what companies we come from, and hopefully that gives us a little credibility. But today what we're going to be focused in on is account-based marketing. And not sure the level of understanding or experience that the audience has. So we are going to start a little bit at the top in terms of like what is account-based marketing and why would you care about it, but talk a little bit about how you might choose the right strategy for your company. And what sort of martech you should be thinking about in terms of being able to activate that. As part of that, Jeff will talk a little bit about Drupal and how that can help you accelerate your account-based marketing strategies and execution. And we will talk a little bit about our own, I'll be talking about how Acquia has applied account-based marketing and be transparent about some of the things we've learned. This is our first year really doing it. So hopefully sharing some of those learnings will be helpful for you. Just right off the bat, why would anybody care about this? just going straight to some stats, the bottom line, because it can increase your ROI. I think if you look at this demand-based quote, companies that have been using account-based marketing are seeing a 10% increase in revenue. 85% of marketers that measured their ROI and their performance, it's outperforming some of the other options, and we'll actually talk about some of those other options in this webinar. And it's a growing sort of, I wouldn't say trend, but it's something that's growing specifically within B2B, and about 84% of marketers think that it has significant benefits and they have incorporated it into their programs.
Great. So as Eric said, we're going to kind of start at the top and kind of give an overview of ABM, and specifically why it's different and better than traditional marketing in terms of reaching target accounts. So what is ABM? So account-based marketing is a way to target sales and marketing efforts only on accounts that we are well suited to help and close. And so it's all about focus. So one way to think about this is that traditional content marketing and inbound is kind of like a net. You cast your white paper out to thousands of people, create lead scores and ways to measure that, and follow up with the people with the most engagement. There are two problems with this in today's market. One is that it's getting harder and harder to get noticed in the inbox. And so there's research that shows this, and I'm guessing the marketers on the call have experienced this directly. Gmail, for example, has a promotions tab now, which unless you are whitelisted by your potential clients, most of your Marketo emails are going into that promotions tab. So it's getting harder and harder to sort of break through the noise. In addition, this sort of wide net approach just organizationally encourages compromise from an MQL standpoint. And so because we're really focused on engagement and lead scores versus like, are these the clients that we are best qualified to serve? The organizations typically compromise and say, well, this is pretty close and they're really interested, so we're going to go ahead and follow up on this, as opposed to staying disciplined and serving the clients that you are uniquely qualified to serve. And we'll talk a little more about that later. But doing that, sort of casting that wide net leads to inefficiencies and wasted effort in the sales process. So ABM begins with identifying target accounts that are especially suited to your value prop. And so, in contrast to traditional marketing, which is sort of this shotgun and filter approach, everybody's familiar with this funnel. It's kind of what we all learn. It's what we sort of base our content inbound on. Again, it's getting more and more difficult. So ABM flips the funnel so that really everything is focused on that account identification phase. So the effort goes into targeting prospects that you are uniquely qualified to serve, and ABM creates a framework for finding others with the same characteristics, engaging them efficiently, and creating those opportunities. And so one thing to notice, as we identify, expand, and engage, and then the final one is advocate. This is one that even in the ABM literature and content, I don't think gets enough attention. One thing that we've noticed is that for our clients that we are uniquely qualified to serve and that we attain through ABM and with that targeted approach, our NPS overall is good, but with those that are really targeted for us, our NPS is higher. And so you're increasing your chances of creating advocates for your organization way back in the lead gen process, way back when you're targeting accounts, because your value prop is uniquely suited to them. They're happier, they're doing cartwheels, they're advocating and giving you tens and promoting your organizations within their network. And that all starts with that focus at the top of the funnel. So we're going to bring a couple perspectives. I think, in terms of following up and for your organizations looking for ways to expand your knowledge of ABM, ITSMA is one that we are partnered with. They are the organization that actually coined the term ABM way back in 2004 and still provide a lot of good content around it. Serious Decisions is also very reputable and does a lot of content around this. And this is one that Acquia has engaged with, and Eric's going to talk more about. And I think there's a lot of overlap in the approaches of these two organizations, and I would recommend both of them in terms of growing your knowledge of ABM in general.
Great, and absolutely agree. When we were evaluating Sirius, we definitely looked, at both in terms of partnership, and I think that's a really good recommendation to, look at both perspectives, and there is a ton of overlap there. So as we're diving into a little bit, we've moved beyond like what is ABM. So as you think about, zooming in a little bit more, I'm guessing that most of the audience here is B2B, and as you think about B2B and zoom in a little bit for that. Probably all of you are dabbling in some sort of account-focused marketing. So I think there's two different strategies that we'll dive into here, and just want to differentiate the two because I think there's, one, a lot of misunderstanding, and they're sort of used interchangeably, but we're going to talk about some of those differences between marketing to accounts or account-based marketing. And just a flip of the words there, but they're actually two very different things. And I think what you're going to hear as I go through some of these differences are the major themes that differentiates them has to do with how much data and insight you know about the company, at the company or even the contact level, as well as how willing is your company to have a very, very tight alignment between sales and marketing, and how willing is sales to be engaged right alongside of marketing so that they're participating in some of what we know about these accounts. So just going through some of the key aspects of how you go about marketing to a set of accounts. When it comes to the account selection, marketing to accounts really comes down to looking at it by vertical or by a particular segment that's defined by the business, versus on the account selection side for account-based marketing, you really have to have a much deeper set of insights at the company level or even down to the contact level in order to help inform some of the other parts of this, which would be the planning piece. Again, planning at the marketing to account side is more about vertical based versus account based is looking at the actual goals, known goals that you have for a particular buying committee or contacts within a company, so that you can understand what tactics you should be actually deploying. And when it comes to this selecting tactics, on the marketing to account side, it's a little bit more like wide net, where you're looking at the persona, you're looking at the different sort of buyer stage from a decision-making journey, and choosing some of your marketing tactics that way versus at the company or even contact level, figuring out what tactics are going to be so personalized to their specific needs. Then lastly, when it comes to looking at how you actually measure whether this is working or not, on the marketing to account side, you're typically looking at a lot of the typical sales funnel type metrics, MQLs, all the way down to qualified and then closed won, which you're going to look at on the account-based side. However, what's really focused in on as some of the KPIs are really more about how the relationship between you and the specific company is growing. So how you're progressing that, and you're looking at some demand unit points based on that. So that's one of the main differences from how you're measuring it standpoint. So beyond knowing the difference between the two, if we can go into thinking about drilling down a little bit on each one of those strategies, I think one thing that's really important is to starting to be a little bit self-aware about your company and understanding which one are you going to be able to do. There's different approaches even within this, and I like to look at these as almost like the high and low almost, and in each one with marketing to accounts, you have defined demand approach, which really is your broadest approach. This is almost like Jeff's fishnet slide earlier. This is almost like the wide net to a specific set of accounts. You don't know much about them other than they are part of a vertical and you've done your research on that vertical. So you have not a lot of insights. Focused demand, you've increased some of your knowledge about these companies at a company level, but it's probably not all that verified. And you've got a medium level of engagement with your sales group. Versus the account-based marketing side, you've got two different levels as well. Named account industry marketing, and this is for the most part where we are, Acquia, in terms of our level of information and insight we were able to glean up front before we selected the accounts. as well as the level of engagement and alignment we have with our sales organization. Large account marketing is what it sounds like, but this is where you've got the highest level of engagement, almost white glove approach with your sales team hand in hand, and you've got really a ton of verifiable, human verifiable data about your companies and the contacts. And this is really just a different way of looking at that same list I just gave you, but this helps you understand what some of those data points are as you try and identify your company and where you all should go in terms of the strategy for a named set of accounts. Whether you're in the basic level, which again, like I said before, is you really don't know much about the individual companies, you just understand what industry they're in and you have some basic information. Expanded is you've got some sales alignment, but you really don't know much human verifiable information other than what you were able to glean off of your basic database. When you get into comprehensive and account, you've actually started to be able to verify some of those. So you have some existing data that probably was provided by your sales team. And then of course with advanced account insights, the biggest differentiator there is you know a little bit about what their future needs are. So at this point, your sales team has been heavily involved in helping identify some of the insights you know about this at the company level.
So just as a bit of context, as I said earlier, ITSMA coined the term ABM a long time ago, 15 years ago. And so why is it popular now and why is it really just getting some traction? I think one of the reasons, and maybe the main reason, is just the time and effort that it takes to do this without technology. And one way to sort of look at this is, starting at the top of this pyramid, strategic ABM is one-to-one accounts. And so this is how it used to be done in 2004, actually the only way that it used to be done. And so it took a lot of just legwork and it's kind of grinding through amounts of data to attack these strategic accounts. And only the very largest companies had the manpower to do that kind of thing. If you move down the pyramid a little bit, you have ABM Lite, kind of a one-to-few approach, which the real key, and we'll talk about this in a minute, the real key to sort of moving from that top of the pyramid down to ABM Lite into programmatic ABM is just the advances in technology and the ability to kind of pull these martech systems together. And without all of the legwork and kind of people power that it takes to that it took in 2004, you can really, companies that are much smaller than the Fortune 50 can really use ABM to target accounts in the same way. And so, going from this high touch, high expense at the top of the pyramid down to ABM Lite, and then at the low touch and low expense is really programmatic, which is really in some ways a way to just extend your lead gen process as it is and just make it more targeted. So let's get nerdy with it. That sounds a little weird to say out loud, but I did. So I think, starting with technology, as I said, when we talk about how technology has changed over time, there's a quote from the Practitioner's Guide to Account-Based Marketing that I want to read to you guys. The technology, especially over the last few years, has really reduced the overhead required to create a targeted campaign. So the data and tracking, especially around intent, has greatly improved and speed to market is much quicker. And so these tools, these technologies have really advanced over time, and different companies have different combinations of tools that they're using. And so these are some of the tools that we at Elevated Third use to identify accounts, to gather intent, to figure out sort of that center of the bullseye, or that the fish that we want to spear, essentially. But everybody has a little bit different approach, and I think if you guys are familiar with the martech 5000 landscape, I don't know if you've seen this. I think it's actually up to over 7,000 companies, and these are all logos of companies that are in the martech space. And so recognizing that really, there are definitely leaders here, but everybody has a different combination of tools that they're using for email, for intent signaling, for conversational marketing, all of those things that companies like yours have invested in the combinations are really endless. And so in terms of how we approach this, there are really two different approaches to this that we'll talk about. So one is this closed approach, and as you might imagine, Adobe and Sitecore are the villains of our story. The grayscale should be an indicator of how we feel about them. But the real reason that we think that they're not serving their customers in the best way is that they are financially incentivized to monetize the entire martech stack. That's why Adobe buys companies like Marketo. That's why Sitecore builds in all of this marketing functionality into their platform so that they can charge you for things that maybe you've already paid for with Pardot or have already invested in with other components. And so their approach is like, hey, just pay us. We're going to handle it for you. It'll all be okay. Trust us. We've got the best of breed tools. I think there are two things that for us that make me feel like it's not the best approach. Again, like going back to that martech 5,000, 7,000 logo wall, companies have made investments both in time and in effort and money and in just organizational knowledge. Like once you learn how Pardot works and your company knows how Pardot works, how likely are you to want to change to something else just because Adobe says it's going to work better, or because Sitecore says they've got something that's included in your package that they want you to use? So really recognizing that closed system is forcing people into maybe an ecosystem that they're not interested in. The other thing that we feel like is less advantageous with this closed system is their ability to respond to innovation. And so again, going back to that 5,000, martech 5,000 logo wall, those are all companies that are trying to disrupt the market. They are creating things that didn't exist before. Like, companies like Drift and conversational marketing, like 3 or 4 years ago, nobody knew what it was, but now you see those types of conversational tools everywhere. And so the earlier that we can take advantage of those things, the earlier that we can incorporate those technologies into our martech stack and into our strategies, the more advantageous we're going to be relative to our competitors. So, what Dries said, and Dries is the founder of Drupal as well as the founder and CTO of Acquia. The only way to keep up with unfettered innovation is through integrations. And so, Drupal 8 was really built for this ecosystem, and not exclusively. That obviously there's a lot of B2C in Drupal and a lot of government and et cetera. But Drupal 8 is the penultimate B2B martech stack integrator and optimizer. And the reason that is that Drupal 8 is built with a services first approach. And so because Drupal is an API friendly, API open services based approach, it doesn't have any monetary interest in, closing the stack and getting you to buy everything from it. Both Drupal and Acquia have said this many, many times. It's open, and so regardless of what your martech stack is, what investments you've made, Drupal is built to work with all of those tools and optimize and bring them all together. And so we can take advantage of new types of integrations, those that aren't defined by Drupal and PHP code. We can have full decoupling, which we'll talk about in a second, progressive decoupling, and really have the flexibility across the entire website to create these personalized tools and create these experiences that really are compelling. And one of these things, one of the advantages of this decoupled API first approach is that we can work with the latest and greatest JavaScript tools. So Vue and React, Angular, those things, Drupal is built to work with them. And so you can use Drupal as a framework, use JavaScript to create these rich app-like experiences, and trust that Drupal is going to tie all the data together, integrate with your martech stack, and so that create really rich end user experiences. So, as we discussed, there are over 7,000 possible martech tools. Like, the combinations are essentially endless. But for ABM, you're probably going to need to focus on these categories. And here are just some examples of things that Drupal works well with. And so for marketing automation, you've got Pardot and Marketo and Martech, which is just a new acquisition of Acquia's, which is the only, I believe, open source marketing automation tool. Most of us use Salesforce, but Dynamics and NetSuite and all those others are also possible to integrate with Drupal. ID management, a digital experience platform like Acquia, and not only from an application support standpoint, but all of the tools like Lift and Journey and DAM that Acquia provides on top of their support for Drupal and this open ecosystem. And then, also just intent signaling tools like Engagio and demand-based and analytics, like Google Analytics, for example. And so again, you can basically mix and match and, kind of replace these logos with what is in your current ecosystem, and trust that as long as it's built, sort of according to best practices from an API standpoint, that we would be able to optimize and do the cool things that Drupal does to create these great experiences using the data from your respective martech stacks.
And just so for what it's worth, because I'm about to dive into just some of the things we're doing with account-based marketing here at Acquia, our stack, has several of these logos from this. So we obviously use our own platform and all of our different products. But we have Drift as our chat platform. We use Bombara and Engagio, and we are currently on Marketo, but now that we have acquired Martech, we're obviously migrating to Martech as, like you said before, the first open marketing and automation platform. So a little bit about our stack specifically. As we dive into a little bit about ABM, for us, account-based marketing here at Acquia. So first and foremost, it's a very new thing for us. Previously, I took you through market-based, I took you through marketing to accounts versus account-based marketing. We were doing marketing to accounts before. In addition to that, we also do have a layer of our overall marketing strategy that is wide net. And some of that is really more about harvesting the demand that's already out there for us than going out and actually creating demand. So we utilize wide net really for that. Wide net being more of some of our always on channels, paid search, organic search, remarketing, things like that. But in terms of account-based marketing, we just started doing that this year. So I feel like we're early enough on to where we're still, learning and making mistakes, and hopefully some of that will be helpful for you all as well if you're early stages on this as well. As we said earlier, so we actually evaluated several different, but we are a serious customer and had them consult with us to help us figure out how we should set up our account-based marketing here at Acquia. And one of the ways they look at this is they look at it what's called the demand unit waterfall. And the way they define it, and I'm not going to read everything on this particular slide. You guys will be able to get this afterwards, but they have a specific definition for each sort of stage in the funnel. But what we found in working with them is it's not something that you have to take their consultative advice explicitly. You're able to modify this a little bit to some of your own needs. So for us in particular, we were able to look at this and apply a slightly different set of funnel stages. We combined some of these, which I'll take you through in just a second. Other than that, we also decided we were only going to be focusing in on enterprise accounts. And we had to, again, I was talking about being self-aware. And for us, we had to be self-aware enough to know, like we talked about in the strategy section, how much insight we actually had into all of these accounts. And what level of actual engagement and participation we were going to be able to get with our sales department. So that's been some of our biggest learnings. Is the human part about this is not just the, what should the funnels be and what should the theoretical model be, but actually in practice, what some of the realities are have been some of our biggest learnings. So for us, to go into our, if you can look at this is how Sirius defines it. This is actually how we are executing it. So you can see we've combined some of those stages, but essentially what we have here is we started off with, basically a conversation between marketing and sales, and it was heavily led by marketing ops and sales ops. But in identifying, roughly sales had about 1,000, little over 1,000 accounts that they really wanted to go after. So like we talked about before in the strategy setting, in the strategy setting section of this webinar, what we then did was take those 1,000 that sales wanted to go after, and we're able to go through and look into what did we actually know about that 1,000. And from that, we were able to narrow down to right around 700 accounts that we put into this program. And again, this was our first effort into this, and have organized our account-based marketing program based on these stages. And again, you can go through all the individual bullets, but the gist of this essentially is during the targeting, we used Triplio, and we're doing more air cover and broad-based approach, but it is vertical specific, vertical and persona specific to the accounts that we have on our list. Essentially, then what we're trying to do is use Mumbara to help listen and look for intent. And as we go down the funnel is where we start to get a little bit more of the handoff from marketing tactics into sales tactics, especially with our BDR, with our business development representatives team, which I'm guessing several of you have something similar. You may call it something different than BDRs, but this is where the handoff starts to happen. And as we talked about before, unlike the sort of traditional marketing or even the marketing to accounts approach, we're still tracking MQLs and we're trying to get to close won and qualified. But really what we're looking for here is an increase in intent and an increase in activity and engagement from those buying committees. As we progress down this, what we're looking for in order for this to exit out of these stages and be a qualified opportunity is for us to have identified the full buying committee, and to just, because I think I skipped over that piece just a bit. When you think about an account, it's not just the company. What we've learned, at least in our particular industry, is that there's a committee of people who are making that decision about whether they're going to go with us or say an Adobe. And so making sure we've identified that entire buying committee and actually have engagement is a key part of this progression through these stages. So as you can see, the tactics sort of increase as we go through from targeting and listening into the actual engagement aspects of this, ultimately handing it off to a qualified opportunity where we know the whole buying committee. We've identified all of them, and there is some degree of activity that meets a certain threshold. I think different companies, Sirius can, or someone else can help you, advise you on what your scoring should be. But for us, we have a particular minimum threshold in terms of what the engagement score needs to be for it to be qualified, and then that gets handed off. So like I said, we've been doing this since January. We've rolled it out in North America as well as in our EMEA region. EMEA lagged behind us just a little bit. It's partially that was because they have a very different set of rules in terms of the type of targeting you're able to do there, GDPR, et cetera. But for us, what we're seeing is success. We're seeing that, at the earlier stages when we've got our ads that are really more vertical and persona specific, trying to get some engagement and intent scoring, we're seeing those exceed our normal benchmarks. So when we compare those against some of the ads that we have in our wide net programs, they're exceeding those benchmarks. So which makes sense because essentially what we're finding it from a strategic standpoint, if you think about the messaging, people are responding, even if they don't know who Acquia is, they're responding to things that look like them. So they're responding to messaging that is vertical specific or persona specific, and that helps get some of that original engagement. And then what we're seeing is that they start to engage with us. Some of the things we've learned, if this could be helpful, is, we introduced webinars, industry-specific webinars, probably a little too early in those stages that I talked about before, these stages. And what we found is, until they're really, truly engaged with you, one, they may not be interested in a webinar, but two, once they've already gotten past the, who is Acquia? Oh, they do work in our particular industry, they're less interested in perhaps a very narrow vertical specific webinar. So that is a tactic for us, has not worked as well and is something that we're looking to reshape and maybe introduce vertical specific content into a larger, broader webinar. not to get too tactical. The other thing is, as I said before, we have a really large number of accounts, and what we are going to be trying out as our next stage in this is pulling out, perhaps per region in North America, pulling out 2 or 3 key accounts, key large accounts. If you go back to Jeff's triangle, the ones that are at the top of that triangle, pulling out 2 or 3 of those into a select sort of subsegment within our overall ABM program that we can really apply some additional white glove marketing tactics to, including actual old school direct mail with some swag and things like that, but also some more white glove service that's coming from our sales side. So those are just some of our learnings in our, 8 months worth of ABM here at Acquia. I'm stuck. Sorry.
All right, and now we'll talk a little bit about, just in contrast, how we've implemented some ABM tactics at Elevated Third, and how we've been starting to use personalization on the website as part of that equation. So this will feel a little different than maybe Acquia. So some of the audience might be thinking, well, we don't have those kinds of resources, or our company's pretty small. How do we get started without a serious decisions necessarily helping us? And so this might be a nice contrast of how to be a little scrappy and get started right away. So what we've done is focus on 6-week kind of micro ABM campaigns. So we have a large target list that's technographics and firmographics, and using some of that Discover org intent data stuff. But given our resources, we start small with 6-week sort of sprints. The idea taken from development to highly target 40 to 60 companies in one cycle and try to get some quick wins with that. So if you've read the practitioner's guide, you'd probably, the quote about it might be a year before you start seeing real movement on a completely cold account. With this approach, you can start to see some KPIs incrementally right away. So it's a good use case to prove viability, and if you're trying to get alignment, you can start real small and show some quick wins, and then hopefully get the ball rolling internally, invest in technology, some of those other things. So for identification, we use Discover org, and so part of that is not only finding companies, which are actually the easier part, but finding people. People are like the key. Like what Eric was saying about the committees, you get your influencers, you get your primary decision makers, you get your secondary people, your advocates. Maybe someone in IT is going to be an obstacle to overcome. Identifying the people. A platform like Discover org is going to validate a lot of your contact info. So it's helpful because you could go through, crawl LinkedIn, manually try to send people emails and see if they bounce and try to track people down. But that way is a good way to find who you're actually going after and then import them into Salesforce. So building that list is where we start. From our cadence, we're talking about the alignment is aligning kind of the BDR outreach with the marketing air cover stuff. So that might be a combination of LinkedIn outreach, sales emails, chats, that kind of thing, with your more drip campaigns, your CTAs and your landing pages, your website visits, coordinating that along those 6 weeks or whatever that smaller scale sprint is. We do a lot of it, especially email outreach manually, like sending crafted emails to those contacts, and it does work better. You're getting past spam filters, you're staying out of the promotions tab. It's pretty important, but again, that's where the scale is important. So once you start investing in kind of large scale outreach, you might automate some of that. You don't need to right out of the gate, especially when the advantage goes to personalization. So ultimately, all of this activity drives to the website, no matter what you're doing. So if you're, like Eric was saying, whether it's a webinar or a piece of gated content or whatever, like usually the website is a key point in this process. and you're driving conversions there. Not only that, is all of your secondary tactics like your retargeting ads, your paid social ads, your extra network connections. All that's coming to a head right at the website. So it's all coming there, and oftentimes we see, and this is because primarily a technology problem, everyone was kind of getting to the dumb website, meaning that it was uninformed about any of this other personalization stuff going on, which can be a problem. It kind of leads to this this issue if you've built this awesome program that's highly targeted using all these insights, and you drive to a website that has no idea what this person is, what they're interested in, what company they're from. It's all kind of for nothing, or it can really disrupt that personalization campaign. If you've ever you called about your health insurance and you have to enter your code and your birth date, and then the first question the operator asks is, what's your name? And you're just like, I just typed it in. Why are you asking me again? It's the same thing. You just cause a lot of frustration. So what you want to do is, if you can think about, to use the railroad metaphor, we've got our generic website, but we want this personalized track for an ABM campaign for a smooth handoff. We want to keep that momentum going so it all feels cohesive from a UX standpoint. So if you're looking at kind of the plan as a whole, if we're seeing pieces of creative and touch points, you could see how we would all want to connect. So, your personalized email content on the left with signature banners that are tailored to them. If you're using something like Sigster, that gets even more advanced based on their buying stage and all kinds of things like that. They might refer people to a colleague, like, hey, you should check these guys out. They're emailing someone else on the committee that maybe you didn't know. It's a new hire. You land on the site, it's personalized to them. It's got a primary CTA to a webinar right for that audience, promoted LinkedIn posts, and all the retargeting is tied up with that. I think the point here is that the personalization is trying to catch all of those touch points and make sure that they keep, it's almost like a Hollywood set built just for that audience that feels like it's made just for them, even though it's not actually just for them. So one comparison that you might look at, if we look at kind of the sites side by side, when you start to personalize, this is our site. On the left, you see kind of your standard Drupal-powered digital experiences. We don't know who you are necessarily quite yet. But on the right, we're talking about SaaS specific. We're talking about ABM. We're touting some of our ABM-focused partners. Our case studies have been realigned to match with them with some CTAs that go along with it. Now, this is not just one. You might say, oh, we could just do this with a landing page. You could, and that's typically the old school way of doing it. But with our site and any site running something like Lyft from Acquia, you can personalize every single touch point on different pages. So like multiple dimensions on multiple pages. So it feels totally cohesive all the way through. So again, they're seeing a very personalized version of an entire site, which just, now you're not saying, click through this list of webinars. You see the one that applies to you. You see the 5 case studies that apply to you, the testimonials that apply to you. So it's a much more efficient user experience too, because you can narrow and actually make, provide less content to have to digest, but it's more relevant. So ultimately, you would want to build a site that kind of has this approach for every vertical that you might be targeting, every campaign you might be targeting. One of these tracks, if you were going white glove, you might go totally one-to-one. Like we're trying to court Southwest Airlines, I'm making that up, but you're using Southwest branding and playing on words, and all your headlines are trying to tie into their brand values and all that kind of stuff. That's where you would invest. They get their own track because we're really trying to court them personally. But the advantage of personalization is that all these tracks run simultaneously, but they're only being seen by the people who want to see them or need to see them. So it makes the website much more powerful and multi-dimensional, but not overbearing towards all users, where it's like, if you're an airline, click here. If you're in healthcare, click here. So it's a more efficient user experience ultimately for everyone.
So really quickly, I'm going to sort of connect this back to Drupal, and there could be a lot of the audience that already is their company is using Drupal. If that's the case, how do you actually do any of the thing that Judd was just talking about as far as personalization? And the way you do that is with Acquia Lift. It's really the only personalization engine out there that's optimized for Drupal. It's built, obviously, since it's ours, it's built specifically for Drupal. And we've actually just launched the V4 of that, which as a marketer, I couldn't have been more excited because some of its key differences, it made it a lot more easy for a marketing department to be able to use Lift, deploy Lift without having to pull in all of our developer friends every time we wanted to do something. So at its most simple, what Acquia Lift is like the examples that he was talking about before, as opposed to having multiple landing pages out there and having to develop those individually, it's dynamically rendering the right information on the screen at the right time. And you're able to integrate that in with the rest of your technology stack so that it works with your account-based marketing program, so that it does deliver that correct content at the right time. Thinking about, from a marketer's perspective, how do you even think about personalization, whether you're using Lift or something else? What we would recommend, because you can get really excited and want to go extremely complex really fast, but we would recommend a crawl, walk, run approach to that, with crawl being some of your basic fundamentals in terms of the information you do know about a user that's coming to this particular site. Walk gets that a little bit more in increasing information. And then run, you have a complex set of information you know about that user that you're able to apply to be more personal. These are just some of those things. So crawl could be something like, what country they're coming from, and you're able to apply that with maybe their vertical segment. That for us has been a huge, like at a crawl stage, that on our site is some of the things that drive the most engagement and conversion rates for us. As you progress through the amount of data that you have on your users, you can get much more complex into the run stage where you've got CRM integration and you're pulling that in, or even cross-channel behavior. So if you've got multiple sites within your company ecosystem, if you're P&G, you can pull all of that from multiple sites in order to provide information on a user that has been to multiple sites and apply that and personalize it at that level. One other part about being self-aware is understanding what sort of strategic resources you have actually within your marketing department. And most of our customers actually, they don't have the strategic knowledge to be able to put all this together. And it does take a good partner like Elevated Third. So they're one of our certified Lift partners and work closely with many of our customers.
One thing I wanted to mention about this is we're excited to be part of this program, but there's also a benefit for the end user. And so what Acquia has decided to do in that crawl, walk, run framework is, as part of our Lift Solution Partner certification, we can run 2 simultaneous pilots with our existing customers. And so for customers that aren't quite sure about the organizational will to do personalization, or maybe the long-term expense, we can do some quick proof of concepts as part of our subscription to Lift, and kind of check those boxes for our existing customers and allow them to kind of grow into a more enterprise engagement with Acquia, which I think is one, really smart on Acquia's part, and really shows their commitment to that crawl, walk, run approach.
Just some views of the product itself. In the spirit of time, I'm not going to linger on these too long, but it comes with a robust dashboard. And again, as a marketer, you're able to see these things and see all the different segmentations and personalizations that you have. And then at a campaign level, you're able to see how those are performing and can make optimizations on the fly. It works very well. Here's a case study specifically. It's cloud-based analytics provider. They're actually doing personalizations as part of their account-based marketing program. And so they're tailoring content and CTAs, much like we are on our site, but they're seeing, they're running over 200 personalizations on their site, way more than we are. But great results for them, and that's because it's coupled in with their account-based marketing program. So overall, I think we've taken you through a little bit about what ABM is, how you can go about assessing your own company and the level of sales alignment and insights you have so you can pick the right strategy. Why Drupal is a really great option for you to help accelerate your ABM program, and that the fact that you've got to be doing this with personalization in order to make it work really well. So one note from,
Yeah. So thank you so much, Eric, Judd, and Jeff. I just wanted to quick highlight that Aqueongage is coming up on November 11th through the 13th in New Orleans. And this is an annual customer conference designed to showcase the creative and forward-thinking digital experiences that Acquia customers and partners are creating today. And we are offering a discount for $200 off ticketed price for existing customers and those who are evaluating Acquia. And the promo code is on the screen, and it's Get Engaged. And if you want more information, you can visit engage.acquia.com. And now we're going to hop into a Q&A. In the spirit of time, we'll just go through a couple questions. All right, first question, and this is for anyone who wants to answer. In terms of personalization, how would you recommend a company new to personalization or ABM get started?
I mean, I'm happy to jump in, and then Jeff, please chime in as well. I'll speak to it from our own perspective. Obviously, you know, we're at Acquia, so we are promoting Lift, but as a marketer, I was new actually to Acquia when we joined, and we had just started using that particular product when it just launched. So I was very excited about being able to do all these things. But going back to that crawl, walk, run analogy, the best advice I got was from the Lift product team themselves, where they basically said, let's start off by doing some really basic things. So we picked a few particular areas on the site, the homepage, a few areas that we knew were both heavy entry points, but also conversion points. And we focused in on those, worked together when we were doing our redesign and replatform, worked together to think through those user flows. And pick just a few. And then after 6 months, we were able to evaluate the data, see what was working and not working, and move on from there. Beyond keeping it simple like that, we also kept it simple with just the segments itself. So we didn't go too far in terms of what we were able to glean. So going back to some of those examples in the crawl, we specifically just looked at vertical, so by industry as well as geography. And one other segment, which was if they had shown any, by behavior on the site, any interest in any of our products. Those were the 3 segments that we were able to use to drive our personalizations, and that's how we launched for us. So that was a good way to start. Good advice from our product team that I was able to get to where I didn't overcomplicate it off the bat.
I would say some other tips would be focusing on what you actually want to say, rather than on what the technology can do. I think a lot of people tend to get caught up in thinking about variations without actually thinking about how you would talk to individuals differently. If you're not going to change what you're going to say, then personalization doesn't really matter. And so you need to be able to say, oh, if only I could target this one person, I would speak in a totally different way and tell them only this. If you focus on that, then the tools kind of help you figure out how to do that. But they don't tell you what to say, even if you can segment them and target them. So that's always a good point. And the other one I would say is thinking about context as another variable to play with. So one that we see with SaaS a lot is kind of a welcome mat versus welcome back. So the first time visit versus the second visit, like you don't need to repeat necessarily all the intro about us stuff. What can you say the second time that someone comes back to kind of move them along? And then also, you know, current customers versus new customers. So if you know someone's hit your login page multiple times, you know they're probably a current customer. So that's more of your upsell, your resources to use the product better, you know, treat them like a customer. And again, go back to the healthcare analogy, they're not a random person calling. You should know them a little bit and treat them like you do. So those are a couple other suggestions.
I would just add one thing. I think you know, as Eric said, like audience identification is key, and sort of Judd's slide of the railroad tracks for your ABM campaign going off differently, and then everybody else kind of sees the same thing. That's a good way to get started, because you're not trying to be all things to all people. You're saying, we're doing this targeted ABM pilot, or we're doing this targeted ABM approach. What would we say differently to this specific audience? And then looking at your website and almost doing a content audit, as Judd said, to just reprioritize your case studies, add in some more specific CTAs, because you know that you're targeting one specific segment, but just not, as Judd said, not getting bogged down in all the different variations and what we might do with 7 different variations in the future, but just say, like, we're doing this ABM campaign starting September 1. Here's how we want to talk to them differently. What content do we currently have that makes that easy? And just try to create something that's kind of low barrier to entry for your initial campaign.
All right, thank you all. We have time for one more question. So kind of along that, someone asked, I can't seem to get any momentum with ABM. Where do I start with internal alignment?
Yeah, I think that's one that comes up almost every time, I think in sort of varying degrees. I think the key is, if you can find an internal champion, somebody on the sales team, somebody on the product team that sees, just at a high level, the value of this approach, and make them part of your initial pilot. And then with that proven success, once that pilot gets off the ground, and if you do a 6-week implementation, with, like I said, the Lyft agency solutions partner, like, you're able to do those things without a big financial commitment. Then you can get sales and marketing aligned, at least on a small scale. You can show some results. You can knock down some of those technical blockers of implementation, and then numbers speak. And so then that becomes a case study internally that you can take to a broader audience internally, or up the chain of command to say why you should do it more broadly. But getting some quick wins and getting some champions, on the sales team and on the marketing team and on the product team, I think, are key.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think, I'm guessing that if you don't have an account-based marketing program already implemented, you're already getting requests from your sales team to do very, very company-specific tactics, and trying to do those as one-offs as opposed to as some sort of actual program is really, one, not scalable, but it's just a resource drain. So if you can take the scrappy approach, I would go find the most senior salesperson who keeps asking for those types of things, have them help be a champion for this. But then of course, you're gonna have to prove it out by doing it in a small degree. Also, the other thing to make a point would be, by starting an account-based marketing program, it doesn't mean you're stopping completely everything else you're doing. As we said before, we're still continuing to do our wide net always on in order to harvest some of that demand. So I think looking at it as a smaller investment at first, and then as it continues to deliver, you can perhaps then start funneling some of your other investments in wide net into account-based, and it's just more of a shift, but it's not a black and white thing.
All right, thank you so much. And thank you all again for attending our webinar today. As I said previously, slides and the recording of this webinar will be posted to acquia.com and also sent to you via email within the next few days. And if you have any additional questions, please send them to marketing@theacquiateam.com. Thank you and have a great day.